Okay, turn number 15 is complete. So we're about to do turn number 16, which is January 44. And that will be turn 16, January 44 is the last turn before we get to the die roll for the variable ending of the war starting in July of 44. So this is the last turn coming up here. Turn 16 is the last for sure turn that we're going to have in the game. Although based on the probability of the die roll, it'll probably go several turns beyond that, but you never know. So maybe a little bit of a scramble here on turn 16 for each of the three alliances trying to scoop up some victory objective points before the game possibly ends. So maybe a little bit more risk-taking on the part of some of the alliances, especially both the Comintern and the Allies, who are significantly behind. So I added up the victory points here at the end of turn 15. The Axis is far and away in the lead with 16 total. Then the Comintern is actually second with 9, and the Allies in third place with 6. So actually the Allies and Comintern combined don't even add up to what the Axis has. So taking a look first for Germany on the Eastern Front. So they took Orel Kursk back. So they're back to the doorstep of Moscow. They had also taken Western Russia. And the Russians went ahead, and even though Moscow has German units adjacent to it from a couple of territories, they still came out and took Western Russia back just because they wanted to take out the couple of German mechanized that were there so they couldn't come into Russia this next turn, as well as these 6 remaining German medium armor in Leningrad. Now they can't reach Moscow on this turn. So it kind of, not only did it eliminate a couple of mechs, but more importantly, it kind of blocked off these 6 German medium armor. Germany will probably still take Moscow this turn. In Orel Kursk, they have a couple of artillery, 8 medium armor. They got 2 light armor south of Moscow. And then in Smolensk, they got a bunch of planes. They've got like 8 or 9 tacticals, 4 or 5 fighters, and a medium bomber. So Germany's probably going to take Moscow this turn. Moscow's defended with 5 infantry, 4 medium armor, and 5 heavy armor, along with a couple of fighters. Stalin has decided to stay in the Kremlin and go down with the ship if that is what happens to Moscow on this next turn. The Russians did build up some units in the factories just behind Moscow in hopes of maybe counterattacking if they can take enough units off the Germans in the battle for Moscow. Then maybe some of these units can counterattack and take Moscow back. It's going to all depend on how good the Russians roll in the defense. Although, since only German ground units can take Moscow, they might actually sacrifice some of their planes as hits just so that they have as many ground units still standing in Moscow when the battle's over with, so that gives the Russians less of a chance to be able to take Moscow back. So we'll have to see how that plays out, but Rommel is definitely going to lead the charge into Moscow this turn. The Russians did move the infantry up from the Transcaucasus just because there's no sense in holding that if Moscow is going to fall. So they're trying to get those guys back into the fight, but they're a long way away. Not much they can do. Germany for units, they went ahead and put down 2 fighters in Romania, 2 fighters in Warsaw. So the 2 fighters in Warsaw are going to be able to reach this turn to Moscow as well. Germany has the long-range aircraft technology. They came up, they took Leningrad this turn. They also took the Crimea with a couple of Fallschirmjäger dropped down there on an empty territory, and they took some more territory in southern Russia. So, again, Russia's kind of getting squeezed right down to Moscow. But the thing that, at this point, why the Comintern have so many victory points is because Russia's doing well in the Far East, at least in terms of, at the time being, having several territories that are worth IPP points. So I believe they'd get 5 victory points just in the Far East alone, because they've got 3 Japanese territories and a couple of Mongolian territories that are worth IPP value. But Japan is starting to concentrate more in Asia right now, and the Russians don't really have a lot in the Far East. 3 infantry, 1 motorized infantry, and 1 cavalry. So it wouldn't take much for Japan to come back and get those territories back away from the Soviet Union. Other than that, Germany and Russia didn't do a whole lot. Germany did spend more money on the Western Front. So they moved their 8 mechs up into Paris and put an infantry down in Paris this turn. So there's altogether 3 artillery, 8 mechs, and 3 infantry in Paris itself. They also bought 5 more mechs they put in Bavaria. And then they bought, I believe, 3 more fighters they put in Western Germany. So that's a stack of about 20 infantry and about 8 fighters in Western Germany. Pretty much the majority of German money is going to building units in the West now, with what the Allies have going on. And speaking of the Allies, the British came up from Lyon-Castel, took this southern French territory, and there's a stack of 11 infantry there. They also brought their entire fleet back up off of London, and it dropped 3 infantry from London into Normandy. So now they own 2 French territories that they've liberated for the time being from Germany. And then they also built more infantry. They have a stack of about 8 transports that they can bring those infantry over with. So Britain's just trying to shuttle as many units across the channel into Europe as they can. It might be a little bit of, maybe a little too late in terms of how it's going to affect the actual outcome of the game. Germany, I think, collected around $92 with bonuses this last turn. So Germany has a whole lot of money they can spend, but at least the U.S. and the British are a combined venture and at least putting some pressure on Germany. As far as the U.S., they took another territory in Spain, wasn't worth any money, and they moved some units up. So in this southern French territory that already had the 11 British infantry, the U.S. brought 5 infantry, 5 medium armor, and they landed all their planes there as well. That's a tactical, a medium, and 3 fighters. So this southern French territory really has no danger of Germany being able to take it back. That's a lot of Allied units there. I mean, the Germans could come over from Paris, and they also have the planes in Western Germany, but I'm not sure they'd be able to take that back. And the British landed in Normandy. I mean, it was only worth $1, but it now kind of spreads the German effort in a couple of different directions. Instead of landing everything, putting everything in one territory, now they're kind of coming at Germany from a couple of different directions, and now Germany has to disperse their effort if they want to try to take back now multiple territories in France. The U.S. also spent all their money on the European side of the map this time. They bought a couple more transports. They also brought the fleet that was in the mid-Atlantic over. They bought 5 more medium armor, 5 more infantry, and 2 tacticals. And they also have long-range aircraft technology. So those 2 tacticals will be able to land in Europe this turn, or at the very least, they'll be able to land in Spain. And now they have the 5 transports ready to bring over 5 more medium armor and 5 more infantry this turn. And then the units that were in C-Zone 33 are starting to make their way back to the east coast of the United States. The U.S. will buy more infantry and armor this turn and be able to move those over. So the U.S. has definitely got a little bit of a shuttling service going on, moving a bunch of ground units over. So I think the Allies are in pretty good shape as far as being able to stay in Europe. Again, I just think that it might be a little bit too late unless the variable die roll endings extend the game for quite a bit. But on the other hand, if Moscow does fall this turn, then pretty much 100% of the German effort will be put into Western Europe. So it's still going to be kind of a race to see if Germany can build up enough of a defense in the West before the Allies can make any significant gains in France. As far as the Italians go, they took a couple more territories, not worth any money, but they went ahead. They took Malta away from the British, didn't lose anything. They also moved up into northern Iran, so now they're right at the border with original Soviet Union territory, so they'll be able to go up there this next turn. Again, no, there's nothing worth IPP value down here, but they might be able to make their way all the way to Novosibirsk if the game goes on long enough. They also, because of improved construction, finished off a fleet carrier, paid for 2 of the production stages on that, and they've got another tactical and a fighter on that fleet carrier. They also bought another transport, and in C Zone number 80 here, they've moved some more units up, so they now have 2 battleships, 3 light cruisers, 4 destroyers, 2 subs, a coastal sub, 2 transports, and a fleet carrier. They also bought 3 artillery they put down in northern Italy. So now on this next turn coming up, the 3 transports can take over 3 infantry and 3 artillery wherever they want. Probably come down here to Gibraltar so that they can go ahead and move their entire fleet out in the Atlantic. So the U.S. might not be able to shuttle as many units over, or at the very least, they're going to have to start spending money on building some maybe capital ships, or at least surface ships, because the Italians, when you combine what they've got off of the coast of Italy and in Sea Zone 80, that would be a pretty big fleet that Italy's got going on. And that was about it for the Italians. They did try to do convoying in Sea Zone 80, and the British have actually had some really good rolls. So because they have advanced submarine warfare, they get a free die roll of a 1 or a 2 on a 12-sided die against each sub that's convoying. So you would think, if you only can get a 1 or a 2, that probably 80% of the time or more, you're not going to get hits. And for the last couple of turns, the British have been rolling exceptionally well. Probably over the last 3 turns, they've taken out 2 Italian subs and about 4 or 5 German subs just on those rolls. So the Germans and the Italians have lost more in the way of the cost of the subs than they've taken off of the British. But on the other hand, both Germany and even Italy can afford the losses, and they are still taking a few dollars here and there off of the British each turn, who are not collecting a whole lot of money. So it's still probably a gain overall for the Axis, but the British have definitely been getting some good rolls on the anti-submarine warfare convoy rating rolls. Down in Africa, the Japanese had come over and tried to go into Cameroon. They brought 5 infantry and a fighter, didn't get any hits on the first turn. The Free French and British combined forces got 2 hits, so the Japanese retreated. They did come up here and take another territory off of Free France that wasn't worth any money. So they'll probably try to go into Cameroon again this turn, see how that plays out for the Japanese. The Germans also, in the Middle East, moved everything up into Kars in this Turkish territory. So they're right at the doorstep to Transcaucasia, which now doesn't have any Russian units in it. So Germany will definitely be able to just walk right in there and take that territory this turn. So that's about it for the European side of the map. In the Pacific, and then I had, again, messed up a little bit. So I had talked about the U.S. blockading Japan with a heavy cruiser here in Sea Zone 38, and then 4 battleships and 2 heavy cruisers in 56. And in order to blockade, you have to have 3 surface ships in the Sea Zone. So obviously the 1 U.S. heavy cruiser wasn't enough to blockade the Japanese. So I went ahead and allowed the U.S. to pull the heavy cruiser back. So there was no blockade of Japan at the end of last turn. Not that it mattered a whole lot anyways, because the Japanese, you can still put ships down at ports, even being blockaded. And that is what Japan did. They had bought 7 new destroyers that they put down in Sea Zone 56 on their turn. Japan had also, again, spending most of their money in Southeast Asia. Besides those 7 destroyers, they put down 2 tacticals in Calcutta, another infantry in Rihe, and then they came down and took Peking that was vacant. And then the CCP actually had taken Anatonkin, so the Japanese counterattacked and took that back. But the CCP did also take Hong Kong, and that is still under CCP control. So at the end of the CCP's portion of the turn, they were up to $20 worth of territory. So they're really rolling. Again, the Japanese counterattack took Anatonkin back, and the problem is that the CCP, even though they're fairly strong right now in terms of their income and the territories they own, it's kind of a house of cards because they don't have a lot of units on the board. They got 3 fighters, but then a handful of infantry, and that's it. When the Japanese came back and took Anatonkin, they killed off 6 CCP cavalry, so that really hurt the CCP. And again, Japan doesn't have a lot of ground units in Southeast Asia, but they now have altogether 3 tacticals and a fighter, so they've got quite a bit of an offensive punch. Probably start pushing back on some of these original CCP territories here on turn 16. And then in the north, not really enough. Just they've got infantry, Japan does, so not really enough to go on the offensive, but at least enough to hold on to Rihe. Neither the Russians or the CCP have enough to take Rihe off the Japanese. The Japanese also continue to move this fleet, making its way back to Japanese home water, so that'll be able to reach 2 battleships, a battle cruiser, 2 heavy cruisers, a torpedo boat destroyer, and a transport. That will be able to get back to Japanese home waters on this next turn. They also went ahead and sent 2 subs back to convoy the Australians. They figured they didn't need them as part of the fleet that was making its way back to the Japanese home waters, so they dispatched them back to Australia. The Australians are trying to come around with this mini fleet here, and they're trying to make their way so they can get to some of these money islands. They got a couple of infantry there, a transport, a destroyer, and a light cruiser. They were going to go into New Zealand, but they would have only been able to attack with 2 infantry. And if the Japanese would have gotten even 1 hit, that would have killed off both of them because they're not Marines, they're regular infantry. So they decided to hold off on that, and instead they're going to try to make their way around south of Australia and head into the Money Islands, hopefully, and be able to take some of those territories off of the Japanese. As far as the U.S., they're looking pretty good in the Pacific, even though they didn't spend any money here this turn. They went ahead and with the 4 damaged battleships and the 2 heavy cruisers, along with 3 tacticals and a fighter flying off of this northern Japanese island, they went ahead and attacked the 7 Japanese destroyers that were newly placed there in Sea Zone 56, and they killed all 7 destroyers and only took 1 hit in return. So all the planes flew back to that Japanese island, and then all of the units that were off of the coast of San Francisco have moved up within striking distance of Japan itself. So that's 2 battleships, 3 destroyers, and then 5 transports that currently have 3 medium armor and 3 infantry. And then the remaining 2 transports will be able to pick up the 2 infantry and the 2 medium armor in this northern Japanese island. So Japan's going to have to spend pretty much almost all their money putting units into Tokyo itself, because the U.S. are going to be able to attack Japan on this next turn with a total of 5 medium armor and 5 infantry, along with the planes they have as well. So Japan's going to have to, again, probably spend, they did, I think, collect around $68, $72, somewhere around there. So they got plenty of money that they'll be able to put units down. So the U.S. probably is not going to be able to take Tokyo. There's 1 infantry there right now. If Japan drops down, say 10 infantry with those 2 major factories, then, and actually both of those factories, Japanese have improved factory technology, so they can each actually produce 8 units. So Japan could put more than enough units down there. Those 5 infantry and 5 medium armor, even with the U.S. planes, probably are not going to be able to take Tokyo. But the U.S. could land in other Japanese home island territories. Now, this Japanese fleet down here is going to be able to reach on its turn before the U.S. Goes on turn 16. So these 3 U.S. damaged battleships and 2 heavy cruisers will probably fall to this Japanese fleet. But the remnants of that, unless the rolls go really well for Japan, the U.S. will just be able to counterattack with the planes, the 2 battleships, and the 3 destroyers here, and then wipe that out. So they'll still be free to land somewhere in the Japanese home islands with their ground units. But again, I don't think they have the juice to take Tokyo. And without taking Tokyo this turn, as you can see, the U.S. has absolutely nothing on the west coast. So there's nothing even remotely behind this initial landing. So I don't think it's really going to matter a whole heck of a lot. The U.S., it would take, a turn to buy a bunch of units and then 2 turns to make it over there. So you're talking 3 turns before this force here has any backup. So, and with the Japan collecting on average, $65 or more a turn, there's just no way the U.S. would be able to be in a position 2 or 3 turns from now to take Tokyo. So at least the U.S. has got kind of Japan bottled up. Japan will probably transition again to not only an all-out defense of Tokyo, but continue to put units in Asia to combat both the CCP and the Russians. That'll probably be Japan's strategy for the rest of the game. They're going to probably give up on naval units at this point. It really doesn't seem to matter a whole heck of a lot as long as they maybe can, prevent Australia from taking some of the money islands back. So that's how things look heading into turn number 16. We'll see if Moscow falls and the Germans then can devote their entire attention to Western Europe.